The rain poured mercilessly that night. I stood alone outside the hospital, clutching my coat as if it could shield me from the storm inside my heart. He had walked past me moments earlier, holding another woman's hand. And in that instant, my entire world shattered into pieces. Welcome to the Untold Love, a place where hidden stories of the heart find a voice. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments below. I used to believe love was simple. That if two people cared enough, everything else would fall into place. That was the kind of girl I was, soft-hearted, trusting, a dreamer in a world that often felt too harsh. My life was ordinary, yet I always carried this secret hope in my chest, that one day, someone would come along and make me feel like I belonged in a story worth remembering. And then, he walked in. I still remember that moment vividly. It was at a cafe near the train station, where the smell of coffee lingered in the air and people hurried in and out, lost in their own worlds. He wasn't like anyone else, there was a certain calmness in the way he carried himself, an aura that drew me in before I even realized it. He didn't smile easily, but when he did, it was like the world paused for a heartbeat. We started talking, casual at first. Small conversations about books stacked on the corner table, about the rain outside, about the little things people usually overlook. But in his voice, I found comfort. In his silence, I found mystery. It was strange, how quickly he became a part of my thoughts, my day, my heart. Days turned into weeks. Coffee shop encounters turned into late-night calls, and those calls turned into endless conversations under the stars. He was different with me, softer, more open, as if he allowed me to see parts of him that the world wasn't meant to. And I cherished every single piece. For me, it wasn't just attraction. It was connection, the kind that made you believe in destiny. I thought, this is it. This is what I was waiting for. Every glance, every touch, every word from him stitched itself into the fabric of my heart. But looking back now, I realize I was falling for a man I didn't fully understand. I saw his gentleness, but not the shadows behind his eyes. I heard his words, but not the silence that carried secrets. At that time, I was blinded by love, pure, innocent love. And maybe that was my first mistake. In the beginning, everything felt effortless, like we were two pieces of a puzzle finally fitting together. But slowly, almost unnoticeably, small cracks began to appear. At first, I brushed them aside, convincing myself that every relationship had its difficult days. But deep down, I felt the change. He wasn't as present as before. The late-night calls grew shorter, sometimes disappearing altogether. His messages became delayed, his replies colder, and his voice carried a weight I couldn't recognize. When I asked, he would smile faintly, assure me he was just tired, just busy. And because I loved him, I believed him. But love has its own way of sensing the truth. The warmth that once wrapped around us began to fade. There were moments when I caught him staring into the distance, lost in thoughts he never shared. And when I reached for his hand, sometimes he would hold it firmly, and sometimes, it felt like he was slipping away. One evening, I decided to surprise him. I went to his office with his favorite coffee, a small gesture to remind him of us. But when I arrived, I saw him walking out, phone pressed tightly to his ear. He didn't notice me at first. His voice was tense, almost desperate, as he said, "We'll talk about it later." Not here. The moment he spotted me, his expression changed, like a mask quickly being put back on. I wanted to ask, but I didn't. Fear held me back, the fear of hearing something I wasn't ready to face. Instead, I smiled, handed him the coffee, and pretended everything was normal. But inside, a storm had begun. Nights grew lonelier. The bed felt emptier, even when he was lying beside me. He wasn't mine the way he used to be. Something, or someone, was pulling him away, and no matter how tightly I tried to hold on, I felt him drifting farther. I told myself it was temporary. That love could overcome silence, secrets, and distance. But somewhere deep down, my heart whispered the truth I didn't want to hear. I was no longer the only one in his world. And soon, I would learn just how cruel that truth could be. The truth came crashing down on me like thunder in the middle of a calm night. He didn't confess gently. There was no trembling in his voice, no apology heavy with guilt. Instead, his words cut through the air with cold finality. She's pregnant. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The room around me blurred, my hands trembled, and my heart felt as if it had stopped beating altogether. I searched his face for regret, for shame, for something that could tell me this was just a mistake he wished he could undo. But all I saw was distance, an emptiness in his eyes that made me feel invisible. I wanted to scream, to cry, to run. But I stood frozen, waiting for him to say something, anything, that would make it hurt less. Instead, he leaned back, his voice steady, almost businesslike. You and I, we can still make this work. But only if you agree to what I'm asking. I didn't understand at first. My world was still spinning, and my mind refused to process the cruelty of his words. Then he laid it out, his deal. I was to remain by his side, play the role he needed, and keep our lives looking perfect from the outside. In return, he promised security, stability, and the chance to still be a part of his world. A deal. That's what my love had been reduced to. Every part of me wanted to walk away, to slam the door and never look back. But then came the weakness of my heart, the memories of his laughter, the warmth of his touch, the belief that maybe, just maybe, love could survive even this betrayal. So I agreed. Not out of strength, but out of fear, fear of losing him, fear of being left with nothing but broken dreams. I told myself I was choosing love, when in reality, I was surrendering to a cage built of lies. From that moment on, our relationship was no longer love. It was a contract, a silent agreement where my heart was collateral. And as I looked into his eyes that night, I knew I had just signed away my freedom. After that night, nothing felt the same. I was with him, yet I was nowhere in his heart. Days turned into a carefully painted illusion. To the world, we looked like a perfect couple, standing side by side at events, smiling politely, playing our roles as if everything was in harmony. But when the doors closed and the lights dimmed, silence filled the spaces between us. A silence that screamed louder than words. He gave me everything material, a house that glistened with wealth, gifts that sparkled under the light, dinners at places people only dream of. But love? That was something he withheld. And no matter how beautiful the cage was, it was still a cage. At night, I would lie awake beside him, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of his presence yet missing the man I once knew. His back would be turned, his breathing steady, as if the distance between us was more comfortable for him than my touch ever could be. And in those long, lonely hours, I would wonder, was I just a placeholder? A mask he used to hide the truth of his other life? The cruelest part wasn't his absence, it was his divided presence. I could see it in his eyes, how they softened whenever her name came up, even unintentionally. I noticed the way he spoke to her on the phone when he thought I wasn't listening, his voice gentler, his tone more careful than it ever was with me. And yet, I stayed. I endured the ache of being second, of being chosen only because convenience demanded it. I told myself it was strength, but deep down, I knew it was fear, fear of letting go, fear of facing the emptiness I would be left with. One evening, as I walked past his study, I heard it, the sound of his laughter. A kind of laughter I hadn't heard from him in months. My heart froze as I realized he wasn't laughing with me, he was laughing with her. In that moment, the truth pierced through every fragile hope I had been clinging to. I wasn't his love. I wasn't his choice. I was only the shadow standing in the background of his real story. And nothing is lonelier than living in someone else's shadow. There comes a moment when silence becomes unbearable, when the weight of unspoken truths crushes whatever little hope is left. For me, that moment arrived on a night I will never forget. I had held on for so long, convincing myself that things would change, that if I loved him enough, he would find his way back to me. But that night, something inside me broke. We were Sitting in the living room, the air heavy with unspoken tension. He scrolled through his phone, his eyes distant, while I sat across from him, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't hold it back anymore. My voice trembled as I asked, "Tell me the truth. Was I ever more than just a deal to you?" The question hung in the air like a blade, sharp and waiting to cut. He froze for a moment, then looked up at me. His eyes carried no guilt, no remorse, just exhaustion. And then he said words I will never forget, "You knew what this was. Don't expect more than I can give." It was as if every fragile piece of me shattered in that instant. My love, my patience, my sacrifices, they had all been reduced to nothing more than an arrangement, a transaction. Tears filled my eyes, but for the first time, they weren't born out of weakness. They were born out of strength, the strength of finally seeing the truth without illusions. I stood up, my hands trembling, my heart breaking, yet my voice steady. "Then I can't do this anymore. I'd rather walk away with nothing than stay and lose myself." He didn't stop me. He didn't call my name. He just sat there in silence, watching as I gathered the last pieces of myself and walked out. The door. The night air hit my face like a rush of freedom and pain combined. Each step away from him felt like tearing out a part of my soul, but I knew I had no choice. Because sometimes, love doesn't end with goodbye. Sometimes, it ends with the realization that you were never truly loved at all. Time is a strange healer. It doesn't erase wounds overnight, nor does it promise to make you forget. But slowly, it teaches you how to live with the scars. The first few weeks after walking away from him were unbearable. The silence of my home echoed with memories of his voice. The empty space beside me in bed reminded me of the nights I once believed we shared love. I cried until my eyes ached, until my body felt numb. There were days when I wanted to go back, even knowing the pain that waited for me. That's the cruelty of love, it makes you long for the very thing that broke you. But somewhere between the sleepless nights and the quiet mornings, I began to change. I started to see myself again, not as the woman who was trapped in his deal, not as the shadow of someone else's love, but as someone who deserved more. I picked up pieces of my old self I had abandoned for him, my dreams, my laughter, my freedom. Years passed, and though the wound never fully disappeared, it no longer defined me. I learned that closure doesn't come from the person who hurt you, it comes from within, when you finally accept that some stories aren't meant to end in forever. And then, one day, fate brought him back into my sight. It was at a train station, crowded, noisy, full of rushing strangers. He stood there, older, wearier, carrying bags that seemed heavier than just luggage. For a brief moment, our eyes met. There was no anger left in me, no bitterness, no desperate longing. Only peace. I smiled, not because I still loved him, but because I had finally learned to love myself more. He didn't speak, neither did I. We didn't need to. That silence held more closure than words ever could. As the train pulled away, I whispered to myself, sometimes, the greatest love you can give someone is to let them go. And in that moment, I knew, my story with him was over, but my story with myself had just begun. Years slipped away. Like pages torn from an old diary. The pain that once consumed me softened into memory, no longer sharp, but still etched deep within me. I had rebuilt myself, piece by piece, learning that strength is born in silence, and healing is found not in forgetting, but in forgiving. One autumn evening, as the sky painted itself in fading shades of gold, fate tested me once again. I was walking through the train station, the place where countless stories begin and end. And then I saw him. He stood at the far end of the platform, older now. His shoulders carried the weight of years, his eyes looked tired, and his laughter, the laughter that once felt like music to me, was absent. Beside him stood the woman he had chosen long ago. Her hand rested in his, and for a moment, I saw what I once longed to be, his forever. They looked happy. Not in the way fairy tales describe, but in the quiet, steady way life sometimes grants two people. I should have felt bitterness. I should have felt the sting of old wounds reopening. But instead, an unexpected calm washed over me. My lips curved into a soft smile, not from longing, not from regret, but from acceptance. Because in that instant, I realized something I had once been too broken to see: I had survived. I had let him go, and in letting him go, I had found myself again. As the train whistle echoed through the station, I whispered inside my heart, sometimes, the greatest love you can give someone, is to let them go. And with that, I turned away, stepping into my own future, lighter, freer, stronger. His story no longer defined me. My story was my own. For love is not always about holding on. Sometimes, the truest love is found in the courage to release what was never meant to stay. That was the day I learned, endings aren't always tragedies. Sometimes, they're beginnings in disguise.